Beginning in the late 19th century, so a large collection of cuneiform tablets from central Anatolia were discovered on the antiquities market. In an attempt to find out the archaeological context of these texts, the Czechoslovakian archaeologist Bedřich Hrozný went to the area and persuaded the villagers to tell him where they had been finding the tablets, which had then been fed into the antiquities market for about 40 years. These tablets were kind of coming on the black market, and people were aware of them, but they didn't know where they were coming from. So they showed him precisely the locations where they had been digging from his account. And Hrozný learned that the tablets didn't come from the Huyuk, from the main mound, but rather from the lower tell, just off of the mound to the northeast. And this area has since, by archaeologists, been deemed the Karum, Kanesh, the harbor or market or colony of Kanesh. Hrozný then began his own so-called excavations at this site of Kültepe in 1925, which ultimately was a series of haphazard diggings, which turned up another 1,000 tablets, and together with what was found on the antiquities market, the total at the time rounded to about 5,000. Unfortunately, most, if not all, of these tablets, the 5,000 initial, have no archaeological context, really. We have a sense of where they're coming from on the map, but no proof of any archival data to speak of. Since their discovery, the old Assyrian scholars have been hard at work providing editions of these texts. With help from the Carlsberg Beer Foundation, the project blossomed into the Old Assyrian Text Project. Additionally, since the dawn of the computer age, which actually began in the 1960s, these texts have been added to a digital database and shared online through the CDLI, Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, providing a tremendous resource for scholars such as myself to work with these texts using new tools and in the process to ask some new questions of this rich group of texts. My study of this digitized text corpus has been to data mine and visualize the social networks attested textually with the hopes of reestablishing the internal structure in order to make up for the lost and missing external structure or lack of archaeological stratigraphy. I do so by isolating the names and relationships of these individuals in the database, and then representing each name and their hierarchical relationship as it's indicated as nodes and edges. Nodes are the circles and edges are the lines that represent the relationships between these circles, between these entities or individuals. In the case of my social network analysis, all of the nodes are individuals. They're people that have been disambiguated. The results of the analysis are then combined in a graphical database, displaying the names and relationships contained in about 2,000 letters together. So you get the letters that give you hierarchical information and the other 3,000 texts that give you a snapshot of individuals coming together on a tablet to give some semblance of a community or whoever's coming together at a point for a transaction on a cuneiform tablet. So once we've graphed the network on the basis of centrality, which is so the size and color are both indicative of the weight. So it's showing hierarchical rank that is quantifiable, and then so there's a bit of background into what I've been doing. Now on to the topic of my talk. While there are clearly hundreds of Assyrian and Anatolian female anthroponyms or personal names, they are only sparsely referenced throughout the Old Assyrian text corpus. Then we add the natural obstacles of homonymy and paponymy, the name ambiguity, and the history of women traders has largely gone untreated. While more and more studies are coming out about Assyrian archives at Kanesh, including a lot of information on the social and daily life, the Anatolian women at Kanesh have received much less attention, perhaps because they are less well documented. At least that's what we assume. what we were able to say about the confluence of these two lesser-known groups, the local population at and around the site of Kanesh, and those well-behaved women who seldom make history, is still up for grabs. The findings I present here come from a study on the relationships between the Assyrian and Anatolian onomastics, or prosopography, and is an examination of the relationships of these individuals that boil down to proper names, to define rank and membership of these women and men, to visualize them in context of their communities. From the 5,000 published texts at Kanesh, we were able to glean these sites, the names of these sites. While the results seem representative, this method remains to be applied to the entirety of the texts that have been found since 1920. So there have been altogether 23,000 tablets and counting. That said, in addition to the many Assyrian names, we find a number of various ethnicities or cultures, which are not always easy to recognize. Hittites, Luvians, the Hattis, and the Hurrians make up 4 of these ethnicities that we have been able to identify so far. But there are a number of names which fall under the category, the kind of humorous category of banana names, because they sound like the word banana. So there'll be Walili or Kurari, or Kura for short, or just Kua, and you see apocryphations and all sorts of plays and even nicknames within these texts that have been difficult to try to figure out to who they belong exactly. So one of the questions I decided to pursue was posed by the old Assyrian scholar Michel, who said, "It is not a matter of discussing onomastic and linguistic problems in detail, but rather to determine if an attested name of a woman denotes membership in the Anatolian population at Kanesh." So to what extent can we say someone who is named and mentioned on the text actually implies hierarchical social rank and membership within this network of trade that's extending throughout Anatolia? Paul Garelli, another famous scholar of Old Assyrian, was also interested in this question 48 years ago. He said, "Ethnic groups are not homogeneous. Onomastics reveal constant intermingling manifested in 2 forms. More directly, when a man bearing a characteristic of a given group marries a woman from another group, and indirectly, when an individual of a given group is the father or son of an individual whose name is characteristic of another group. It is very likely that the second phenomenon is the consequence of the first. That is to say, in the case of mixed marriages, children received traditional names in the 2 families." I'll say more about that later. What we can say about the confluence of these 2 lesser-known groups, the local population and the females, will be largely based on the letters and this aggregate data. As it turns out, we have extensive evidence of long-lasting marriages between Assyrian men and local Anatolian wives. In some cases, we have several letters exchanged between the spouses. The Assyrian merchant Aššur-nādā serves as an example of such a situation. He had been married in Aššur to an Assyrian lady whose name is not recorded, and he had some daughters and a son from this marriage. He also has married in Kanesh to an Anatolian lady called Šišaḥšušar, with whom he had a son or daughter. All of the children whose identity is known had good Anatolian names, but it seems clear that the son, born in Aššur, was the one who took up a career as a merchant in Kanesh, whereas the son of the Anatolian wife is unattested in our material as an adult. We also know that his Kanesh daughter was later married to an Assyrian, but with status as a secondary wife. This may indicate that children from mixed marriages in Anatolia had a lower status, but we need more evidence before such a conclusion can be made safely. So let's read this letter now. From Aššur-nādā to Šišaḥšušar. As to the fact that I wrote you, saying, at the beginning of spring I shall write to you, so you can come here. Do not be angry. Winter has overtaken us, and consequently the capital that I was expecting reverted to outstanding claims. And that is the reason I did not write you. Why do you say, I cannot manage? The capital that I could lay my hands on, very little could be had. Much has been lost. When I arrive at Kültepe, I shall take what is there to take, and as soon as I leave again, I shall write to you, so you can come to me. As you know, she must not touch my fund. If he comes, do not look at missing, and do not give it to him. But if he asks you for the girl, then let him take Sama and his child where he wants. The only reply which we have from Šišaḥšušar reads as follows, and this isn't a direct reply to the previous letter, but you'll get a sense that it doesn't matter. To Aššur-nādā from Šišaḥšušar. She actually writes her name that way. Since you had left, they have received 2/3 mina, 5 shekels of silver, and have given that to Utsur-Šišaḥšušar, son of Ashur-malik. Utsur-Šišaḥšušar has taken 3 kutanu textiles. They received 12 shekels of silver from Sharapunua and gave that to me. The house of Kutubish bought 4 sacks of barley. I received it here, and 1.5 sacks will be for myself. The house of Kauba brought 3 sacks of wheat. However, they did not give me anything. Since you have left, Ashur-bel-awatim came here and has divided up the hides. Your share used to be here, but they now have removed them. 15 shekels of silver from Tarhunu, they owe the rest of the silver. Thereof they've given me 8.25 shekels of silver. However, they did not give me anything else, and 5 shekels still owed to Tarhunu. Also, it was they who took the rest of the silver. They have received nothing from your outstanding claims. Make Utsur-Šišaḥšušar pay attention to your orders. The term for repayment is overdue by 3 months. Even firewood he did not buy for me, so I myself have bought it. From Habi we have 1 2/3 minas, 5 shekels of silver. Utsur-Šišaḥšušar has taken it. 2/3 mina we got from Haluli. Also, Utsur-Šišaḥšušar has received 5 shekels of silver. Okay. So in these 2 letters, we are thrust into the challenging world of venture capitalism in the Bronze Age, in particular through the perspective of one merchant, Aššur-nādā, and his wife, his second wife in Anatolia. They're separated from each other by about 1,000 kilometers, while he is in the capital of Aššur, writing to her, living in the colony of Kanesh. This brief window into the life is intriguing and elusive, because there are really only a dozen, literally 11, textual references to this female. And the majority of them resemble the latter rather than the former. They're not as verbose about the circumstances, and they're much more matter-of-fact about the business and the finance that is taking place from the colony itself. But they do attest to this crucial role that the female played in the social network of her family. There are no tablets noting any marriage agreements between Šišaḥšušar and Aššur-nādā, so it's primarily through inference that we describe her as a second wife or concubine in Anatolia. However, she's quite visibly in charge of the household in Kanesh while he is away on business trips. The letter conveys that Aššur-nādā has promised earlier that he would write to her in the spring to ask her to come and join him in the other Anatolian colony where he is staying. But bad weather has had serious consequences for his economic prospects. He expects to arrive at Kültepe, and on leaving from there he promises to write again so she may come to him. This promissory writing we find here is very typical of the Assyrian merchants, both their Anatolian and Assyrian wives. In many cases, it's in fact written into the marriage contract explicitly that the local wife should follow her husband where he goes. However, for the most part, we find that the Anatolian second wives tend to reside at their husband's house and manage their estate in Kanesh, and only rarely go to Aššur for special occasions. For example, one female, Kunanaya, travels to Aššur at the death of her husband in order to get a share of the estate. In contrast, it's only slightly more likely that the Assyrian wives would travel with their husbands. More often than not, they too are strung along by promises in a series of letters delivered between the different towns and regions that these traders frequent, but sometimes never get to their husbands at all. Yeah. The second letter is most likely written by Šišaḥšušar herself, based on the characteristic feature of plain writings, so typical of locally written texts. In this, the only extant letter written by Aššur-nādā's Anatolian wife to him, we hear of her daily chores as being in charge of his household interests in Kanesh while he is away. The anonymous they, who receive outstanding debts, etc., must refer to his local representatives, presumably Eliahum, Ameme, and one of the brothers. In letters to them, we often hear that they are supposed to give collected debts, etc., to the maid, i.e. Šišaḥšušar. Aššur, son of Aššur-nādā, also figures prominently in the correspondence. Here he receives money and deposits textiles on Aššur-nādá's account in the port office. Sacks of barley have been received from the two houses belonging to Anatolians, and hides have been dealt with, and Šišaḥšušar enumerates the number of smaller debts collected. All in all, a very, business letter. It's pretty common to see at least one other recipient in the letters received by these women, usually an Assyrian when it comes. One can imagine that the persons mentioned here were at times living in the same house and eventually would have had a familial relationship with the sender. And such relationships also reflect a social standing and hierarchy. For example, it seems clear that Šišaḥšušar would have her husband reprimand the unruly Aššur, but is incapable of effectively doing so herself. Unfortunately, without additional text, it's been incredibly difficult to understand the place and position of an unknown Anatolian second wife. Proof that Dr. Ulrich's adage was correct. Well-behaved women seldom make history. However, thanks to a more robust understanding of how these many desperate relationships are connected through statistical analysis, there are additional insights that we can find by looking at her position in the old Assyrian network. First, we can measure the relative ranks of both Aššur-nādā and Šišaḥšušar in comparison with the rest of the 5,000 old texts. Here, we see the distribution of ranks for Šišaḥšušar, this being over 11, the full 11 texts. For the most part, a rank that falls here, a primary rank of 911 out of 1,000, 1,000 being the lowest parameter that I set, 1 being the highest. So Aššur-nādā, his rank typically between 4 and 420, almost consistently. Whereas Šišaḥšušar, primarily, so this is sample size, the main sample size in a run of 40 times across the text returns 911, and only twice in this case, or in a dozen times, rank a much lower rank, or higher actually, 527, closer to that of her husband. And this is the letter that we just read, the one that Šišaḥšušar wrote herself.
Yeah.
And that, communicates something in terms of the social rank and hierarchy. Here, this is what's called an ego network, which is basically just all of those people who have either written to or mentioned her in a letter. And we see here the, kind of like the 7 degrees of separation between you and Francis Bacon, or more recently Kevin Bacon. This is the first degree of separation for Šišaḥšušar, which is it consists of 26 nodes, and there's within these individuals there are multiple attestations, and it's about 0.72% of the overall population that we have. So 2 walks away, or 2 degrees of separation, we're already at 72%, with over 1,000 nodes, which means basically that this is a really small world. People are highly connected. Within 3 walks, it's primarily because of some of these really big players. It represents almost the entirety of the social network that's exhibited across the 5,000 texts. So it's a highly connected society. Let's add the hierarchical and ethnic or cultural data to this. We see that Šišaḥšušar, with a rank of 911, still has a higher rank than Aššur-nādā, with an overall rank of 962. That is despite the fact that he has an Akkadian name. He's the son of Aššur-nādā and an Anatolian who takes an Anatolian wife. And he's located in Anatolia as well. But even in this more myopic view of Šišaḥšušar's ego network, we can see the great advantage of having an Anatolian wife, a second wife. Just as Pagdett and Ansell have described the importance of a robust actor in history, such as Cosmo Medici in the medieval Florentine trade, it was largely due to his ability to move between both the Florentine elite and the locals with whom he established a network of trade that gave him the strategic power to build this great banking system that flourished. By appealing to and identifying with both groups, these foreign traders and venture capitalists were able to establish closer ties and stronger networks, ensuring a slightly wider safety net in times of financial difficulty. We still know little about the children from such marriages. It's clear that they were given a mix of Assyrian and Anatolian names, and this is when it gets tricky with some of these names in particular. That the Assyrians would often adopt Anatolian-sounding nicknames even, perhaps for the purpose of playing this robust actor, this role of in-between and working with Anatolians and appealing to that culture. But it's still tenuous. Okay. So let's step back now from this intimate view of one Anatolian second wife in order to look at the context of the old Assyrian trade at large from the perspective of gender and culture. Okay. So by and large, we see that this cluster here represents the prominent Assyrian merchants with Akkadian names. Whereas the majority of the Anatolians, there's some here, but for the most part, I can take away the Akkadian names, and we see just the Anatolian names are largely unaffected. So this is, for the most part, a really large Anatolian population. This is also, so the larger the name, the higher the rank, the more prominent the individual. Same as we had with the colors before. It's clear that there are a select number of prominent Anatolians here who are perhaps highly connected with the old Assyrian elite merchants and those who are probably conducting business here in Anatolia. Then we can contrast this with the population of females in the old Assyrian society, and we find that while there are a number of high-ranking females among the Akkadian population, here for example, the majority of the females are low-ranking and found among the native Anatolian population. So each of these points indicates a female who's made history, in a sense, as they were recorded on the Assyrian archives on clay tablets. Many of these women clearly played a valuable role in stabilizing the trade in Anatolia during the Bronze Age. Looking at the overall picture, we can see the data behind the gender roles and relationships within the Assyrian Anatolian communities and begin to better understand the complex relationships between the traders and the local cultures. While it's clear that the Anatolian women had a lower status according to the Assyrian hierarchy, it is interesting to find that these women were fully in charge of the household and were relied upon almost entirely for the management of the business while their husbands were abroad. When their occupations fall almost exclusively under either domestic activities or the involvement in the commercial activities of their husbands, making them clearly a member of their business, the way in which they would conceive of it, mostly in terms of kin, but even extending then into the Anatolian networks, so a much broader sense of kin than just immediate or nuclear family. When viewed in the aggregate, it's clear that these relationships with locals, in particular marriage with Anatolian women, provided the old Assyrian traders with the crucial financial security and access to their extended social networks, which were all absolutely necessary to maintain these long-distance trade agreements. Together, their relationships they created in the process extended throughout the expansive Anatolian community, and they show the Anatolian women in particular were left in charge of the household and enjoyed the trust of their husbands, although rarely their company.
I was just a little boy. I threw away all of my actions, so as well.